What's up, gangsters? It is a cold and blustery day here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises. Definitely a good football watching day, and as you can see, I'm all outfitted with my Cowboys sweatshirt and ready for them to lose again this afternoon. Anyway, aside from football drama, I just felt like making a follow-up video. Because it's cold right here in my little workshop space, and I feel more like flapping my lips for no good reason than I do actually doing any work. So, if you follow any of my nonsense, you know that like a week ago or something, I made a video called Conventional Wisdom Not Always Wise. And I stated at the beginning of it that it might piss a few people off. And yes, there definitely was some rage, kind of from some expected places, but more on that in a minute. And I posted it in, I think, maybe 4 or 5 Facebook model making groups to kind of just as a social experiment, and just to see kind of what the response would be. And as expected, in the Scale Modelers Critique group, it produced some lively discussion on both sides. Some disagreement, some agreement, some good fun, lots of hilarious GIFs, and just the kind of shenanigans that we enjoy in there. But an overall learning experience, I think. A couple of the other groups I posted it in was kind of like, meh, not much response at all, which was kind of to be expected. I mean, I did say at the end this was going to be one of those why did you bother kind of videos, because, these opinion things rarely actually do anything to help us improve our techniques. Although I would argue that one reason that I go on about the not clear coating before decals thing is because it can in fact help people to avoid issues with clear coats. I mean, the bottom line is a clear coat is another step you're doing, and that creates another opportunity for an issue. And if you don't need it, then why would you want to do something that creates risk? That's aside from all of the possible things that a clear coat might do to help you, one of which is not prevent silvering. But again, I'll get back to that in a second. Anyway, the other place that I posted it was in the monogram forum or group or whatever you call it. And that's made up of largely of guys who just want to build old school monogram kits. And so they are kind of an old school bunch. And that's fine. Hey, that's all good. I mean, we all do this for our own reasons. And the response in there probably would have been crickets as well, except for that's where the haters came out. And I normally don't give these guys any oxygen, and some people, after I make this follow-up, are going to say, why did you bother with that? And I agree, but I think maybe you'll see why after I show you a little bit of what transpired. Because sometimes people go over the line, and they should be publicly shamed. Anyway, so if you didn't watch it and don't want to waste time on it, for which I wouldn't blame you, the basic premise of that video was that I made 3 points. That it's not necessary to do a clear gloss before decals, because no one in the history of model making has ever proven that it prevents silvering. I'm going to unplug my airbrush here so maybe my compressor won't go on as often. My trusty little Iwata Neo has apparently developed a slightly leaky air valve. So, get on with it, compressor. Anyway, point number 2 was that Scale's Sheen is just silly. And point number 3 was that the philosophy that less is more when it comes to weathering in and of itself is also kind of silly. Now, more specifically, to kind of work my way backwards through those, my point with less is more is that just doesn't really mean anything, and less is just less, and It's really about trying to tell a story, and there's a right amount of weathering to do that. And more or less isn't really the first question that you should be asking. That was really just purely an opinion piece and about, my own personal philosophy. The scale Sheen thing, on the other hand, gets more to a mathematical exercise. And my point was that the whole scale Sheen thing and saying that a model should be less glossy the smaller it is, or it should be less glossy because it's a model, is just dumb when you do the math, because surface sheen is a product of surface, sheen, surface reflectivity, is a product of surface roughness. All the little bumps that reside on a surface. The more bumps you have, or the bigger the bumps are, the less reflective it is, the flatter it's going to be. So, if you take a real life size surface finish with all of its little bumps, however big they are, and you scale it down 35 or 24 or 48 times, the bumps get smaller. That's going to produce a smoother surface. Therefore, it logically should be shinier, not duller. And that's just not even an opinion. That's just an inarguable fact of physics and light and so forth. One guy on my YouTube channel came back with, well, yeah, but in order for that to be true, you also have to consider that you'd scale down the light and the photons. And I was like, well, yeah, but if frogs had wings, they wouldn't bump their ass every time they hopped either. I mean, that's just totally moot, because you can't scale the light. The light is the light. So the other sort of argument to that comes up is, yeah, but they just don't look right if they're that shiny when they're that tiny. That might be kind of a meme in and of itself. So tiny shouldn't be so shiny. I don't know. I'll have to work on that. Anyhow, I understand that. But what I was saying in my original point was, that's more a product of the nature of the finish itself. Like a 2K gloss urethane is kind of plasticky, and so when you combine that with a tiny little car, for example, the overall effect is that it looks more like a toy as opposed to a real car. And if you polish it out, it takes a little bit of that specularity away and it looks more authentic. But that has nothing to do with size. That's just the quality of the finish itself. And, other people are just like, well, yeah, but I just like the way it looks better if I reduce the reflectivity at scale. Dude, boom, there it is. Awesome. That's the only answer that's really required. If you just like the way it looks better, then great, do that. I'm the first one to say that we should all exercise our artistic vision in whatever way we see fit. I mean, these things are, after all, a snapshot in time and an interpretation of what we see in real life. So go for it. But my point was, don't try to justify it with some bogus scientific theory, or as I will show you, that it's purely contextual and that it just depends on where you stand. That's my favorite one. Anyway, going back to the point number one, the decal silvering thing. Yeah, look, that also is not an opinion. That's a pure fact. No one has ever proven it. Okay, I get that some people have repeatedly found that they got no silvering when they used a gloss prior to decals. But that doesn't prove anything. The simple fact is that if you're going on your own sample size of one based on your own progressive experience, in other words, you keep doing the same thing over and over again and you get the same results, that doesn't prove that not doing the thing that you're doing wouldn't work just as well. It's just not proof. It's simply anecdotal evidence of your own experience that supports your belief. But it's in no way, shape, or form any kind of proof. It's not scientific. There's no control in the experiment. It's not an experiment at all. And my point is, look, yeah, awesome, great. If you feel better at night by doing a gloss layer before you do your decals, then go for it. My point is that it's not necessary. Stop telling people that it's required, because it ain't. There's just no proof for that. Now, As has been fairly pointed out, there may be other reasons to gloss before you decal. If you need to put a barrier layer in there to protect some of the work you've done before, like let's say you've done some work with oils and you want to protect those from some additional work that involves mineral spirits, and then you just happen to want to put decals on, like let's say you do paint and then panel lines, and then you're going to do some oil work that's going to be also on top of your decals. Well, you're going to just end up putting decals on top of a gloss layer. Bonus. Great. Cool. You also may find, as some people have, that if you put your decals directly on the paint and then you put a clear layer on top of that, the clear may affect the clear film in the decal differently than it affects the paint in the surrounding area. In other words, you may have a color shift there. And having the same clear coat underneath the decal as you do on top of the decal may prevent that. So that's a valid argument. The other thing is decal edges. Look, decal edges are their own thing, okay? There's a physical difference in the height of the decal over the surrounding paint. And that has nothing to do with what's underneath it. So anybody that argues that you're going to have less of a decal edge just because you clear coat before the decal is just smoking crack. I mean, that's ridiculous. It has nothing to do with it. So anyway, those are kind of my sort of rebuttals, if you will, to what got thrown my way in some of the discussions. And I respect all that. That's, you know, those are other people's opinions, same as mine. At no point am I saying this is right and that's wrong. I'm just saying, look, you don't need to do it. And if you're thinking about it in this particular way, well, that is not the correct way to think about it, because there is some actual science to back it to back it up. So different. But that does not prevent some people from completely losing their shit when you espouse these sorts of opinions. And now I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. This is good fun. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at this first one. This is a classic example of how these things go sometimes. This is from the monogram model group, and this guy, of course, immediately has to respond, first of all, with the mocking me for posting my opinion and calling me the one true source of all modeling knowledge. Anyhow, he says, okay, the surface of flat paint is an entirely different sort of roughness than scale, rivets, or panel lines. Yes, Einstein, it is. Much smaller. And so, therefore, you'd think much less likely to trap air, right? If, in fact, that is the cause of silvering, which I'm not convinced that it is. I personally think it's just a failure of the adhesive. At any rate, have you considered that glossing gives a modeler better control that is more predictable of the result? Yeah, I get that maybe you think it does, because, you know, maybe it seems that way to you, but again, there's absolutely no proof that it gives anybody more control. Again, if you feel like it does and that helps you sleep better at night, awesome. Carry on, champ. Okay, or perhaps there are different ways to accomplish different goals. Yeah, of course. You sound like the sort of guy who'd look over Da Vinci's shoulder and criticize his technique. Okay, so I say, yeah, only if he were wasting time with unnecessary methods. And I'm, you know, at this point just kind of looking at the thing with good humor, and this is just banter, and it's all good. But then this guy comes back and says, I have proven it, time after time, consistent results. So I allow, as I have proven that sandwiches are the best, because I eat one every day. And this guy then says, troll away, you're an arrogant fool. And there it is. I mean, that is the final refuge of a guy who has no actual defense. Going straight for the ad hominem and slinging insults when you have nothing more intelligent to say. But that's actually pretty minor compared to what happened with these other clowns. Okay, now, when I refer to these other clowns, what you have to understand is that these are all guys who at one time or another have already made a nuisance of themselves in Scale Modeler's critique group and either been ejected or they rage quit. In particular, these few guys they came, they joined the group or whatever, and they didn't like the banter, they didn't like the profanity, they didn't like the shenanigans, whatever. They were just offended by the whole thing, and they acted entitled to have things run their way, and when they got rejected, well, then hissy fits ensued, and there you have it. But this has been like well over a year ago, and they apparently still haven't gotten over it. And anytime that either myself or either of the other two admins, Jim or Matt, posts anything anywhere that they feel like they can attack, they come out of the woodwork. And this is no exception. And this Jeff Cadenhead guy is, right on the money. He's lickety-split. He's like on duty, keeping, a watch on the internet for anything I might say that he can come after. And so he immediately just responds with a couple of examples of YouTubers reinforcing this dogma about having to use a gloss clear before you put your decals on. And if he had stopped there, that would have been fine. He wouldn't have embarrassed himself too much more, but then he had to come over to a completely different group and report my post no less than 5 times. Which is just hilarious. I mean, how do that's just a Keystone Cops move right there. I mean, how much more blatantly can you shoot yourself in the foot? Nonetheless, Jeff at least did not distinguish himself in the douchebag category the way that some of these other guys have, and a prime example here is this Frank Crenshaw guy. Now, Frank and I have had run-ins before. He is an SMCG reject. Like I said, he just didn't have the sense of humor or the social skills to get along in there, and he's one of these guys. He's kind of an intermediate builder, but he takes himself pretty seriously, and he's the sort of dude that can't even do something as simple as spray a coat of primer without writing a novel about it. And this is no exception. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but his paragraph right here that starts with telling me how my logic on scale perspective is completely flawed can basically be summed up by saying that his argument is, but it depends on where you stand, dude. And you can see that down here where he says it's all context. On a real plane that I see 100 feet away, I will look completely different than when I walk up next to it. So if you're looking to do a realistic sheen, yeah, you have to take this into consideration. The sheen at 1 foot will be different than the sheen at 100 foot. It's just a fact. Frank, no, it's not a fact. The surface finish does not magically transmogrify itself according to how far away you are. There may be a perceptual difference. I can agree to that. But again, that is not an effect of the surface finish itself because that's a constant. And if your perception means that you want to represent it in a particular way because that makes you feel better, then awesome. But don't try to make it about some pseudo-scientific bullshit that has no basis in fact. I mean, look, most of us are photographing our models close enough to be put on the internet, and so that whole scale distance thing really falls apart right there. But let's just, for argument's sake, entertain this for a second. I just want to know. I just want an answer to this one simple question. Of the infinite number of possible distances that you could be viewing your model from between 0 and, say, 10 feet away, what exactly is the scale distance that one should use to account for changes in sheen with distance? I mean, what do you pick? Is it 1 foot, 3 feet, 8.759 feet? I mean, is it a certain number of feet according to what scale you're building in? I mean, I don't know, but somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. And I basically carried that same attitude throughout this thread, and it devolved, like I said, into Frank telling me that my dick must not work. He seemed pretty obsessed by that. But he was joined by his little buddy, this Matthew Walker guy, who got really irritated because I like funny memes and GIFs. And then he says, I'm done. I've got more important stuff to do than waste time on you. Must be nice being disabled so you can spend all your time being a dick on forums like this. And then, of course, Frank chimes in and calls me the alpha cunt from SMCG. So, yeah, like I said, the last refuge of people who have no actual intelligent argument. And, you know, there's really not any need to insult people like this because, you know, by the time you've devolved to taking shots at somebody for a physical disability, you've really done it to yourself. I mean, seriously, how much of a piece of shit do you have to be to get so outraged over a difference of opinion about model making, for fuck's sake, that you're going to go after somebody for a physical disability? I mean, really? That makes you a pretty pathetic human being. But Frank, he's going to double down, because after all of this stuff got deleted by the admins of this group, which fortunately for these guys, because lots of people saw exactly how far they were willing to go, Frank sends me this private message on Facebook the next day. And this is my victory lap, because I'll just skip right here to the bottom. You know, Frank was like, well, Frank kept telling me that I must be a terrible engineer. And I'm like, yeah, man, not really. So he says, but you haven't worked as an engineer since at least 2009. You're a fucking wedding photographer. I don't care anymore. I'm just going to block and ignore you. Your little house of lies is all you have. Well, Frank, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what it is you think I've lied about. I've never made it a secret of the fact that I was in engineering for a time. I mean, I spent about 12 years in the corporate world doing mechanical engineering. I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Texas A&M. And I did engineering work, sales, marketing, like I said, about 12 years of corporate work before I decided to leave and do something more creative and fun, which, yes, was photography. And yes, some of my work was wedding photography. I'm not sure what difference that makes, but nonetheless, I don't really see what it is you think I've lied about. But this next part is really the best. I don't want to take all you have away. I mean, is this supposed to bother me or intimidate me somehow? I mean, I'm not really sure what it is this Frank guy thinks he's going to take away from me, especially since, as he says here, he's going to block and ignore me. So, as far as I'm concerned, that is basically conceding the victory, because you just can't take it anymore. Okay, so there you go. That's about enough of that nonsense. But that honestly is not the worst that I've gotten from that Frank guy in particular. He has said things about me being in a wheelchair, which is pretty amusing since it's not true. I haven't even owned a wheelchair in about 6 years. He has, when I was running my GoFundMe campaign for my stem cell project in Panama, he was taking swipes at me about begging for money from my friends. So this is actually not the worst that I've seen from this guy. And, you know, you just have to wonder, you know, how I mean, really, what... These people have wives and kids and families, and what would those folks think if they knew that their husband or dad or whatever was acting like such a complete shithead on the internet over something as silly as a disagreement about clear code? And I know that, you know, a lot of people who are watching this are probably like, yeah, why are you even bothering? And you're right. I don't really want to give people like this any oxygen, but I guess I'm doing this because I kind of feel like, you know, at a certain point you kind of have to take a stand. I mean, there's a line that just should never be crossed. And, you know, idiots like this are going to just keep doing this kind of thing online unless there's some sort of consequence. And yeah, there probably won't be one. You know, there's really nothing, you know, there is no justice. I'm not under any illusions about that. But if one person who sees this recognizes one of these guys' names in a conversation on Facebook and doesn't give them some help that they may be asking for, or doesn't let them into a group, or whatever the case may be, because of this, then, you know, in my opinion, it was kind of worth it. And I think that this is kind of what we have to do, and this is why we handle things the way we do a lot in Scale Modelers Critique Group. You know, people think they can say whatever they want to online, and I just, you know, there's nothing that Facebook or anybody can do to really police that kind of stuff. And so we sort of have to police ourselves. And I guess, you know, I kind of see this as one way of doing that. So maybe a waste of my time and energy, and, you know, kind of makes me feel gross even talking about it, but, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'm interested in your thoughts, so comment down below. Take care. Much love.